It is possible, with surgery and hormonal therapy, to habilitate a baby with a grossly defective penis more effectively as a girl than a boy. Under hormonal replacement therapy at the time of puberty, the body develops as female. Motherhood is achieved by adoption. The individual does not feel like a freak.
It made sense at the time that he became a daughter, because we thought, well, maybe it can work. Maybe it is a matter of nurture over nature.
So when Bruce was 17 months old, he became Brenda. And 4 months later, on the 3rd of July 1967, the first surgical step was taken, with castration. John Money stressed that if they wanted the sex change to work, the parents must never let Brenda or her twin brother know that she'd been born a boy. From now on, they had a daughter. According to John Money's records,
the mother reported, "I started dressing her not in dresses, but, in little pink slacks and frilly blouses, and letting her hair grow."
The Reimers stayed in touch with John Money, and every year they visited Baltimore.
The mother stated that her daughter, by 4.5 years of age, was much neater than her brother, and, in contrast with him, disliked to be dirty. "One thing that really amazes me," she said, "is that she is so feminine. I've never seen a little girl so neat and tidy as she can be when she wants to be."
Although in contrast, Money also noted,
the girl had many tomboyish traits, such as abundant physical energy, a high level of activity, stubbornness, and being often the dominant one in a girl's group. From the beginning, the girl had been the dominant twin. By the age of 3, her dominance over her brother was, as her mother described it, that of a mother hen. The boy, in turn, took up for his sister if anyone threatened her.
Money continued to record his observations of the twins' development, and in 1975 he published a paper about the case. The children were now 9 years old, and he maintained that the reassignment was a total success.
No one else knows that she is the child whose case they read of in the news media at the time of the accident. Her behaviour is so normally that of an active little girl, and so clearly different by contrast from the boyish ways of her twin brother, that it offers nothing to stimulate one's conjectures.
Here was an unambiguous, true-to-life, etc., male that was switched to be a true-to-life female. That made a significant impact on the clinical treatment, and then it was like everybody was saying, "Oh, wow, really, then we can do this."
Milton Diamond is director of the Pacific Center for Sex and Society at the University of Hawaii. Back in the 60s, he questioned Money's proposition that we're gender-neutral at birth and can be reared either way. As a biologist, Diamond thought humans were more than simple products of their upbringing. As a student in the 1950s, he'd been involved in groundbreaking experiments where pregnant rats had been injected with the male hormone testosterone. Their female babies displayed male behaviour, being more aggressive and attempting to mount other females.
So in other words, here's an intervention during their embryonic life which affected their adult life. So those type of experiments showed, at least for animals, that this was possible. My view was a minority view because the Hopkins group had a great status, and my ideas were relatively out of the ordinary.
Perhaps not so much out of the ordinary as out of sync with contemporary trends, whereas Money's approach was much more acceptable at the time, according to Heino Meyer-Balberg.
Biological factors generally, in the aftermath of the Nazi domination of Europe and the misuse of genetics and other biological factors at the time, was in ill repute. So social constructionism was the order of the day.
You're listening to Health Check from the BBC with Claudia Hammond, and today we're looking at a landmark case study with which John Money attempted to prove that nurture could triumph over nature.
I have some very fascinating matched pairs of cases. They're matched because they had the same history before they were born, and they had the same diagnosis when they were born. But because they were born with an error or a birth defect of the sex organs, there was a quite natural and legitimate uncertainty as to which way the birth certificate should be signed. Some of the times the decision has been made that the baby should be assigned as a girl, and other times as a boy. I see some of these children after they've been living in their assigned sex for several years, because the local doctor finally discovered that probably the mistake had been made. Now, here's really the main point that I can learn from these children. You can't force them to change their sex when they come into you at 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, even if you would have made the other decision had you been there present at the delivery. We all have an extraordinarily convinced degree of our gender identity. And if anybody comes and tells you that a mistake was made and you should change it, you cannot believe them.
Girls with prenatal androgen excess would show some masculinization of the genitalia, often quite dramatic so, and also masculinization of play behavior in childhood, but they still usually clung to the sex they were assigned to, which was female in most cases. So it was by no means very clear that these hormones would have a decisive determining influence of gender identity development. It looked quite that the gender identity development was largely independent.
So one assumes that as Brenda grew older and there were increasingly worrying reports about her behaviour, Money must have believed that she still identified herself as female. Yet the facts that John Colapinto revealed in his book after long conversations with the former Brenda, by now a man known as David, do make that hard to credit.
Working on the book and knowing David was really difficult. I mean, he was a man clearly still in the grip of demons. The rage that he could express was just frightening. It was touch and go doing those interviews. I mean, I really sometimes wondered if it was a good thing to be taking him back into these terrible parts of his past.
I could see that Brenda wasn't happy as a girl. She was very rebellious. She was very masculine, and I could not persuade her to do anything feminine. Brenda had almost no friends growing up. Everybody ridiculed her, called her cave woman.
Well, the kids at school were bullying me because I was different. Kids always bully somebody who's different. It's the law.
She was a very lonely girl.
It got so bad, I wound up having like a breakdown. I'd shake like a baby and cry and huddle in the corner. I didn't know why I was behaving like that.
David speaking to the BBC's Horizon team. By the time she reached puberty, Brenda was feeling suicidal, and when she was 13, the Rhymers stopped taking her to Baltimore. Then they decided to do the one thing John Money had warned them against. They told her she'd been born a boy.
I thought to myself, well, I'm not crazy, I'm not turning insane. I thought I was turning insane.
Within weeks, Brenda had chosen to become David. He had reconstructive surgery and eventually he even married. He couldn't have children himself, but he loved being a stepfather to his wife's 3 children. His life as a man appeared to be relatively happy. But what David didn't know until Milton Diamond found him was that he was living on as John Joan in the medical literature.
He had no way of knowing that his case had found its way into a wide array of medical and psychological textbooks that were now sort of establishing the protocols for how to treat hermaphrodites and people who lose their penis. I think it's really what motivated him to talk to Diamond was he just could hardly believe that this was out there as a successful case and that it was affecting others like him.